Today we have Harry Van Buren and Shawn Berman with us. Harry and Shawn are both professors of management in the Anderson School of Management at the University of New Mexico, and they both teach courses in business and society and business ethics. And today we want to discuss with them a topic that it's extremely current and often discussed, and that is, has the greed of a few created the excesses related to the financial crisis that we're now facing? In other words, have bonuses and excessive risk-taking and alleged misconduct, is this, and even blaming, the most wealthy people, have they all kind of created our current financial crisis?
Well, I think the easy answer is yes. Right. But I think that it's really a more complex question than that. I think it's easy to say, oh, those greedy bastards. That's the whole problem here. But I think it's actually a deeper problem than just greed. I think there's actually what I sense is a disconnect between what the Occupy Wall Street crowd is calling the 1% and the 99%. And so I think some of the excessive risk-taking that we saw happen on Wall Street is because there was a lack of empathy on the part of those on Wall Street with really who was getting impacted by some of the financial deals that were going on Wall Street. So it wasn't greed that was the sole problem here. I think it was also a disconnect between the two social classes and Wall Street being able to make some moves that, without really thinking through the impact beyond, is this going to get me a bigger bonus? So I think greed is a part of it, but I don't think greed is the whole answer. And I do think, unfortunately, that we're not asking the kind of questions that would get to solving the larger problem, because it's so easy to say it's just greed, and that's the problem. If we can take greed away, everything will be fine. And I'm not so sure everything is fine, even if you remove greed from the equation.
Harry, what could you add to what Shawn has said?
To add a couple of things to what Shawn said, the first thing would be that we went through a period of time where finance became more and more complex, but it wasn't clear that it was adding any social or economic value. I often tell my classes that finance should be simple, and when finance isn't simple, it's usually wrong and usually engaged in bad behavior. And so a lot of what was referred to as financial innovation was really a way of screening a business model that really wasn't adding significant social and economic value. The second thing I would say is that I think even in terms of people's anger, are they necessarily connecting it to what's going on in Wall Street or going on in the banking community? I'm not entirely sure they have an analysis that is that coherent and sophisticated. They're looking at, the vast majority of people are looking at their own economic circumstances. They're seeing that their incomes are flat, they're seeing that they're working longer and longer hours, that they're paying more for health insurance and other things, and as a result, they're angry, and so to the extent that somebody is talking about bankers and they have a sense that bankers have done something wrong, they might perceive that those two things are connected. But I think a lot of people, particularly in the working and middle class, are really much more concerned about their own circumstances than what happened with, say, securitization of mortgages.
Harry, a Wall Street Journal NBC poll found that 3 out of 4 of Americans say the nation's current economic structure is out of balance and favors really a very small proportion of the population, and really this small proportion takes advantage of the majority at the expense of the rest of the country. What do you think about this? In other words, do these 3/4 of Americans understand how our economy works?
I think it's probably because I do understand how the current economy works, because they're looking at their own experiences. This is not an anti-wealth or anti-business or anti-capitalism economy. You have to work really, really hard to get most people mad at the people who are very rich. You don't have people protesting in the streets against Bill Gates, for example. But what you do have as a phenomenon is a lot of people looking at their kids and thinking that their kids are not going to do as well as they're going to do, as well as they did, rather. And so, why is that the case? Well, university educations are becoming significantly more expensive. Households are finding it more and more difficult to save. And so I think the diagnosis is actually, fairly spot on in that more and more people see themselves accurately as part of this undifferentiated group of people who are working. And then they look at other people who are doing very well at the very, very top end and wondering if there's some sort of relationship between the two of them.
Shawn, is there anything you would like to add to this?
So the only thing I'd add to that, in thinking about the economic structure we have and the makeup of who we think of as being in Zuccotti Park and part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, is it's a lot of students who, one way I think the economic structure has changed is this belief that if you go get a college education, you're going to get a good job. And these people have graduated with an immense amount of debt. I mean, the proportion of debt versus the proportion of proportion of loans versus the proportion of grants has really changed over the last 30 years. So they have a lot more debt from the college education, and they're not seeing a job at the end of the rainbow. So in that way, I think there is something to the way our economic structure has changed, that we're not providing the jobs to the people who feel they're well qualified for jobs.
One final question. What about the people that go to college and they don't have specific skills, are trained specifically for a profession? Is this part of our problem why they can't get jobs today?
Well, I think that may be an anomaly of our current economic crisis making that situation worse. But, I went to a liberal arts college where nobody was trained for a job. And maybe, some of us had trouble right after graduation. But, when I look now, everybody has a job, everybody's doing well. So I don't believe that we need to turn universities into technical training centers and make sure everybody has a skill when they graduate, right? I think there's something to having an educated, a group of educated people that are going to be able to play various roles in the economy that may not be trained as accountants or salespeople or whatever. But I think in the current economic crisis, if I'm hiring, I'm going to look for people who have the specific skills I need. So I think some of those people are part of the people who are finding this economic time very difficult, and that's adding to some of the stresses on the economy.
I want to thank Harry and Shawn for joining us today and sharing their insights. And this topic, as we all know, is always going to be somewhat controversial and provocative, and lends itself to a good classroom discussion.